Working in national security is supposed to be a lot of fun, a lot of challenges, really important for countries. So, what happens if the morale within those organizations goes down the toilet? Hi, this is Phil Gursky, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting in Russell, Ontario, Canada. You're listening to Canadian Intelligence, a podcast about national security. As I have told my listeners far too many times for me to recall, I spent more than 3 decades in national security intelligence in Canada, split almost evenly between signals intelligence or SIGINT with communications security establishment and CSE, and 15 years in more or less human intelligence with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. And I have mentioned on many occasions that I had an amazing career. I was a very fortunate Canadian to be allowed to have access to incredibly sensitive information, work on some very important files that had truly national and international implications for world security and public safety. And I had a job where, in all honesty, with very few exceptions, I couldn't wait to get to work in the morning every day. That's how exciting it was. I left in 2015 and not under the greatest of circumstances. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. But what I'm hearing recently, talking to friends of mine who still work there, is that morale is in the toilet, especially at CSIS. And reports have come out about massive defections or leaving. I've talked to at least several dozen people who have left CSIS for other organizations, some in the private sector and other parts of government, and in some cases in other intelligence organizations. And the question then becomes, what the heck is happening with our security service? And more importantly, why does it matter? So to talk about this issue, I'm joined again by a good friend of mine, Andrew Kirsch. Now, Andrew was on my podcast in February of this year, and he like me, worked for the CSIS for about 10 years. And more importantly, he is the author of a new book, I Was Never Here. And he and I met recently he was at a book signing in Canada, in Western Ottawa, to see how the book was doing. So, Andrew, thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast to talk about a rather dicey issue.
Thank you for having me back, and for prompting that way. No sugarcoating, I guess you're calling it morale in the toilet. Happy to talk.
I hate to say it that way, but it's. But let's start with the good news, Andrew. So, as I said, I met you about a week ago. I'm recording this on August the 11th. It was at a Chapters Indigo in Western Ottawa. You were doing some book signings at the store. How are book sales going? And more importantly, what's been the reaction to the book? I mean, you are a very odd person, and I mean that in the most positive of ways. There aren't a lot of books by former Canadian spies, and you've written one. And I'm curious, what has been the reaction so far?
Well, yes, it's been great. I'm not in jail, so that's good.
That's a good sign.
That was mission one, was not go to jail, and that has been. So I say yet, so far so good. We will date this podcast, but it's been very good. And the next, I'd say, in my order of priority was don't go to jail, and then I wanted to get good feedback from ex-colleagues, which has also been great. A lot of people have reached out of kind of my peer group, and even those who came before me, and some people who are applying. I get a lot of messages from people who are applying to CSIS who have enjoyed it and have gotten a lot out of it and appreciate that I wrote it. That there's at least one story out there about someone who, I joke, who ran away and joined the circus. What happens when you do that? And that was my intention, is to kind of give people a look a little bit behind the curtain about what that life is like and the challenges and the good work that it does. I'm proud to have worked there. I had a good experience. When we talk about morale, it's not something that I am excited about discussing because, as I said, I'm now very publicly affiliated with the organization. I take pride in having been there, and I wanted to, I'm not going to say honor it, but at least represent it or reflect it in a way you don't always get a chance to see. And I think that's what the feedback has been, is thank you for the young people who are starting out their careers. Thank you for kind of showing me what that I had to look forward to or watch out for. And for my peer group and others, it was, I think you captured the spirit of the place. Not a perfect organization by any means, but the fact it's made up of people who are trying to do good work and trying to help, trying to make a difference. All the things that you spoke about in your introduction. So that's been nice, and the sales have been good in that respect too. Trying to do podcasts and get out and talk about it and get on TV. And I went from being zero profile for 10 years, avoiding social media and telling nobody
You were
what I.
never there, Andrew. You didn't
That's right.
exist.
That's right. So then to have to promote the book is and go to the book signings and stand there or try to talk to people about it. That's the key, and try to raise some awareness to get people to read it. But it's been great.
Quite the transformation. And again, kudos to you for writing it. Kudos to you for writing a positive book. Like you said, nothing is perfect in life, but we did a lot of good job. And I like that you use the word pride. I feel the exact same way about my 30 years in intelligence. Very proud to play the role that I did. And like you, I've talked to a lot of young Canadians as well who are interested in a career
Mm-hmm.
in CSIS or CSE. I put up a YouTube video couple of years ago talking about, so you want to become a spy, and it's been by far the biggest
Sure.
YouTube video that I have had over the years. And as you said, people and with me, people are very enthusiastic. They're keen. They want to join this world. And now we have this atmosphere where, as I said in the introduction, the morale is in the toilet. Now, I'd like to talk a bit about that because I know you talk to people and I talk to people. Just for my listeners' edification, there was a report that came back out in 2017 that talked about the Toronto region office. So CSIS has regional offices across the country. And to quote a CTV article from back then, an independent assessment of the Toronto Office of Canada Spy Agency has uncovered concerns about bullying, favoritism, and discrimination, and that low morale is pervasive in TR, Toronto region. What are you hearing about these morale issues at the service? And one more thing before I get to you. There was a recent survey, I believe, carried out within the public service, and CSIS finished dead last out of all the Canadian government departments at the federal level that were talked to, interviewed about how things are going. CSIS came dead last. And here's an organization, Andrew, you may remember from your time there and my time there, we used to brag about being in the top 100 or even the top 20 of hiring organizations in Canada. And to go from dead last, that ain't good. So what are you telling you?
Well, there is, there definitely is something. I was telling you that I had a coffee with a young and new recruit, as I'm sure you get people reaching out to you all the time, and he was enthusiastic and getting ready to join, and like going off to freshman year of college, and then I had a beer later on with some ex-colleagues, and they were miserable, and it's something clearly happens in that 10 to 15 years. It has been it's been tough, and it comes up in private conversations as well as public. I think I saw that transparency report that came out, and I forget the organization that put that out, and they spoke about the challenges of morale and culture there. We talk about whether that's relative to other organizations. There is the Great Resignation. I don't think that CSIS is immune to many people's growing frustrations with their work, but clearly something is happening there where people are demotivated and struggling with the mission and their roles as a part of it. And so I'd like to speak about my experience. I think rather than kind of make gross generalizations about how other people are feeling, I left, right? I had pride in the organization, believe in the organization, and I'm no longer with the organization. And there were reasons for that. It's a tough job. You have to go out and lie to everybody about where you work and what you do. And that creates challenges in your personal life that have to be managed and mitigated. And as you go along, and you get, I would say, more and more tired of doing that, but it's a strain. It is a unique challenge to that job that can grate on you, and it makes your world a little small. I found that I didn't like going out with the friends and social settings. I knew when I was going out, I was going to have to lie to everybody who was there, and that's not a fun way to spend your night. When you're going to meet new people or going on dates, or
Unless you're a pathological liar and you enjoy it.
Exactly, and like getting involved in outside organizations. I know people do it, and I ran for office or volunteering politically. Like, you can't do that kind of stuff without very real sensitivities and concerns. So I think that there's a frustration about the challenges of the job that definitely weigh on you as you go deeper and deeper into it and have to deal with that reality. So that becomes one challenge. And I think for many people, there's issue they're having with career management that they really haven't figured out. And I know for me too, for intelligence officers, you are expected to do these the roles of analyst and field investigator and spend time at headquarters, and then go out to the region, and then if you want to move up, become a supervisor or a higher up in the executive. It is a very difficult process to navigate, and you're really on your own to do it. And it gets hard to kind of life and career plan for yourself. So you're saying, okay, I was in Toronto and I got married, and my wife was not too enthusiastic about the prospect of having to move back to Ottawa, and I didn't love having to tell her, yeah, not only do we have to move back, but I don't know if I'll be a supervisor. I don't know what that means for my career. I don't know how long I'm going to have to stay there. That becomes a real challenge. Whereas other career paths maybe have a little more. Um, you're kind of able to look in the future and see what that looks like. And then if you start looking, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I want to pick up on that a little bit, Andrew. So you talked about how people you're talking to within the sort of 10 to 15 year span, I'm going to guess that in the federal government in general, at least in Canada, I don't know about other countries, that there's sort of a malaise that sets in when you get to sort of mid-careerish time where maybe you haven't advanced as quickly as you thought you would. You're seeing other people get promoted. You're not getting it. You're not winning competitions. The
Mm-hmm.
service has the added disadvantage of, as you're well aware, as an investigator, an intelligence officer, or IO, you're by definition you're mobile. You spend your first couple of years at headquarters, and then you're sent to a region, anywhere from St. John's to Vancouver. And while they do try to meet people's expectations that, I've got family here or my wife has a job here, as I say to people, and this is no disrespect for Regina, but if there's 3 spots in Regina that are empty and no one wants them, guess what? You're going to Regina for 5 years. Do you think that maybe that aspect of the service, the mobility imposition on people, is contributing to perhaps this mid-career, oh, damn, this isn't what I thought it was going to be?
Well, absolutely. Mobility, it just hangs over your head at every stage of your career, and not in a way they're not transparent about. They'd say you are subject to mobility, but that becomes a challenge, especially if people whose family situations change and they have children, but they're not together with their partners and they're not making those decisions
Right.
no longer as a family unit.
Right.
And the idea that if there are opportunities in Ottawa that headquarters that aren't in the region, so okay, well, I got to go back and do my time there. Some people don't want to do that. Some people do. That they can navigate that part of the career. But hanging over the head, absolutely, is okay. When's the next move? How do I time that with my kids going to high school or going to university? It's very hard to kind of project. So, CSIS is. I think they're now also competing more with the public service that offers a lot of opportunities, not where mobility is not part of it, but for advancement, for senior levels. I think folks in my career, and I was one of them, it was that moving to supervisory roles and the frustration of taking on leadership positions, not being selected, having to compete, that having their career limited in that way. And then you look and say, oh, there's a position that pays a few bucks more and it's in Ottawa and I can work remotely from the part of the public service. And that starts to look attractive to people. I think in a way that for more than it had in the past. And so you're seeing a lot of movement there from folks leaving. And that's I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Let's just say that some people who are miserable should go. That's all right. It's where if you're miserable and you stay, I think that becomes a challenge.
Well, I certainly work with some I remember one guy when I worked at CSE, you would say, good morning, so-and-so. And he'd say, what's good about it? I'm still here. And that was his line for 15 years while I was there. So, please use the door kind of thing. Well, and the other thing I'd like to raise, Andy, with respect to morale, I mean, maybe it's about people's expectations. Now, federal governments traditionally are very bad at one thing. You can be an expert, a world-class knowledge person on something, and yet you max out very quickly in terms of your level of government. You have to become a supervisor, eventually, maybe rise to what we call EX executive levels, et cetera, et cetera. I was very fortunate. When I came to CSIS from CSE, they said, we have no desire for you to be a manager. And I tried to be a manager at CSE. I hated it, didn't like it kind of thing. They said, we'll pay you what it takes because of your knowledge, because of your experience. And I end up essentially retiring as an EX1 equivalent, but as an analyst. I didn't do any supervising at all. I did mentor people, but not as a supervisor. You talked about the interesting, and I've heard the same thing, that other parts of the public service, and as I said, I've known people that have gone to other parts of the public service. I always thought, maybe I shouldn't speak for you, that CSIS and intelligence were different. They weren't typical government of Canada departments. Now, this is no disrespect to fisheries and public works, whatever kind of thing, but intelligence was different. The nature of the job was different. The sensitivity of the information was different. The way you handle it was different. I've been hearing rumors that the government, and we're speaking now with the Liberal government. I don't know how far back it goes, but I left in 2015, which is just about the time that Trudeau became prime minister, that the government seems to want to make CSIS just like any other government department. Now, maybe that facilitates lateral movement between organization A and organization B, but to me, you take something away when CSIS becomes like fisheries and oceans. Again, no disrespect intended for fisheries and oceans. Would you agree with that statement that CSIS is, or CSE, another intelligence organization, should be seen as different within the Canadian government?
Well, it's a that's a great question, and I don't know where, if that is the case, where it's becoming more part of public, where that comes from, or when that started. But I know that I joined CSIS because I saw what was happening in the world, and I wanted to be in part of the intelligence community. I
Right.
wanted to be a spy, and I wanted to keep Canada safe. And it was not say about necessarily joining the bureaucracy and moving on and moving up in the public service. It was and that's why that's why I left. I kind of did my time, and I think served as best as I could, and then left. So, and I have to believe that's why a lot of people join. It's not, oh, I'm going to get a good government job and I'll do it for 30 years, and I'll have a good pension. It's no, I have a calling to serve, and this is the way that I feel like I can serve in a unique environment. Sometimes I joke, I say, there were jobs that I was doing in special operations. I said, if I was to do this as a civilian, it'd be illegal, right? I get to do cool things that other people don't get to do. They're legally authorized and all that. And to your point, seeing what the real story is, having access to the most sensitive information to put those pictures together. It is special. It is the things you're asked to do, the sacrifices you're asked to make. So I think it is a disservice if we don't treat it that way. So that's a challenge that they have had, and I think people come to the service as a calling, a call to serve.
Yeah.
In a unique and special way. And I think it is a unique and special organization.
I'm glad you used the word calling, because I've used the word vocation in the past, and I've been criticized for that because vocation has a religious connotation.
Oh,
God's calling you to do whatever kind of thing. I felt it was a vocation in going to
oh,
work every day, just like you, trying to do the best job possible to help keep Canada safe, help keep our allies safe, provide the best intelligence to government so they can make better decisions. I want to take this morale issue one step further, Andrew. And I've been talking to some people who, of course, shall remain nameless, but I have every reason to believe they're telling me the truth. So they're single source, but I think they're confirmed reliable single
sure,
sources.
sure. Okay.
They're hearing from their contacts that some of our allies are taking note that CSIS morale is in the toilet, and are starting to ask questions as to what happened to the CSIS we used to work for. Now, for context, CSIS, we obviously do a lot of, you did a lot of work here in Canada. We all did that kind of thing, but we wouldn't be the organization that we are without our alliances. First and foremost, the Five Eyes Alliance, of course, and even beyond that, under Section 17, which is part of the CSIS Act, we would have intelligence exchanges with all kinds of people around the world. And you can't really do the best job possible unless you have reliable partners, be they your close neighbors like the Americans and the Australians and the Brits, et cetera, or even further afield. What is the impact, do you think, if our allies are saying, gee, I wouldn't go as far as saying we can't work with CSIS anymore, but they're asking questions about what's going on. What is take it to the worst case scenario, Andrew? I mean, if this morale issue persists indefinitely, what does that mean for an intelligence organization that has a low morale issue, aside from the continued bleed out of dozens of people a year? And you've probably seen the same or heard the same numbers I have. We're talking dozens of people a year. A lot of the IOs, intelligence officers, are leaving the organization, and often with that sort of 10 to 15 years experience. What's the worst case scenario?
Well, I think every organization, wants to retain good talent, right? That's a challenge for everyone, and CSIS is no different. I know that I wasn't. If you read a book, I wasn't a super spy, but I was a better intelligence officer year 7 than I was at year 2.
Right.
Right? You have more experience. You feel comfortable in your own skin of doing the role, and have a knowledge of the job and what you're doing in a way you don't when you first start out. So yeah, I think to lose that kind of experience and talent where you put so much into people in these very specialized, sometimes extremely specialized
Mm-hmm.
roles is going to be a challenge. So, I can't speak to your note, but I imagine if someone is going to work with the service, and the person sitting across from them every time is 21 or 22 years old, fresh out of college, that will absolutely, present a hey, what happened to the old graybeards who were
Yeah.
around here? You want to make sure you keep some people around, and I'm sure they are, but especially the good people, keep them there. And I think the challenge, once again, I haven't been there in about 5 years, but where I felt like it was time for me to go it was when I was less motivated, and
Hmm.
where I felt that being constricted, and it wasn't as excited, or wasn't being asked to do some things, and I said, I don't feel the same. I would say the creativity, coming up with new ideas, that kind of motivation, that started to wane for me. And I said, okay, well, that's not a good thing. And maybe I need to go and do something else and find that kind of spark again. I think
Hmm.
that's probably, what you see where morale is low as an organization is people who are not coming up, maybe aren't being as creative, or aren't being as, generating as unique ideas. I think that's where you can see it too, right? Is
Hmm.
like, oh, you just don't see the same spark there. But
Right.
that's and that comes with, yeah, the grind of the job, and maybe feeling like the organization. It's funny. I think the organization goes back and forth between kind of the risk aversion, and this kind of very more operational, and take a few more chances. And that's a healthy tension to have, right? Where you want your IOs pushing to do more things. You want your organization pushing to um, do some interesting investigative work. And then you have to kind of reel that back in with, okay, well, what are our core duties and constraints and all those type of things. So you kind of I think you want your IOs, you want your organization kind of pushing forward, coming up with ideas. And there'll always be the organization kind of pulling back a bit and saying,
Hmm.
okay, that's a good idea, but this is the way we got to do things.
Right.
And you lose something when you don't have that push. When you don't have a motivated group that's pushing for trying to be dynamic, and trying to come up with new ways to do investigations and new techniques and tools. I worry about that.
Okay, I'm going to push the envelope here, and this may come out as vastly over
More than
dramatic.
this, oh my goodness,
Yeah, I know,
talking about.
vastly over dramatic, but for what it's worth,
Okay, okay.
I'm going to paint a picture, worst case scenario, absolutely worst case scenario, where if morale is that bad and people simply don't have the same level, you talked about enthusiasm, you talked about energy, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be creative in how we do investigations and things, which you talked about a lot in your book. The worst case scenario is that people sort of don't give a rat's hindquarters anymore about what they're doing, and therefore the investigations are either sloppy or they're kind of only not done very well. And again, this is the worst. Something goes boom because morale has prevented people or led people to not put the same degree of energy and care, and thoughtfulness and creativity into doing something, and then something goes off and people die. Am I being overly dramatic here?
Well, I think you're definitely being very dramatic there, in your where this goes. Yeah, I think that when I when I wanted to write my book, it was about the experience. And the Americans have a lot of different books, and some of those books are, um, we did this for 20 years and we missed the boat. See some those kind of other books that come out, the finger pointing
Yeah,
books.
yeah.
We haven't had those types of books, nor do I think there's necessarily a reason to. But that's where that goes, right? Is where people
Mhm.
start coming out and very publicly saying we're missing the boat here, we're dropping the ball
We
there.
blew it. We blew it. In other
Yeah,
words,
like that. Yeah, pun intended, or blew it, or
yeah.
um, that. I think that's what you're talking about, is when you start to hear those kind of very public rumblings, and those books get written, and it says, we lost our way.
Mhm.
I don't, as I said, I'm not inside. I don't feel like it's there. I just worry about this erosion. And once again, it's there's like the Great Resignation. COVID's been a challenge. People want to work from home. But this is our national, security service, our domestic intelligence service. It's important. And it's important that people there are, I'd say, sufficiently motivated, or the morale is high, and that I think also that the trust in their organization is is there. One of the things I talk about too is that we don't hear a lot about CSIS, and if every time we hear about it, it's showing up in a report that morale's in the toilet and
Yeah.
people are
Yeah.
unhappy. What is that? What if someone reads that and then someone knocks on the door and asks them for help, or somebody reads, yeah, I hear everyone's miserable over there, and you guys target groups, and that's all I read in the paper. That's not great operationally
Mm-hmm.
either. And with CISA's
Mm-hmm.
out, and to their credit, trying to publicly, have public reports and make presentations at senior levels to say these are the threats that we're concerned about. It's important that people listen to that. And so the
Mm-hmm.
credibility of the organization is, yeah, we're working hard, making some sacrifices, keeping you safe. And this is where we think there are challenges. And they pick up the paper and says everyone at CSIS is miserable,
Mm-hmm.
and organization is hemorrhaging people. It's, I don't think that helps. So they,
Mm-hmm.
have to be concerned and considerate about it. Yeah, as I said, I think you take it to a dramatic conclusion.
And deliberately so. It was supposed to be, a little bit
Yeah,
controversial.
of course. But I just think managing, steering that ship is a challenge. And we haven't even talked about the expectations of new employees versus the way it
Mm-hmm.
used to be, right? There
Mm-hmm.
was the old school mentality of I'm going to do 35 years. I go where I'm told. I never complain, and
Yep.
that's my career.
Yeah.
Well, millennials are not doing that,
Exactly.
and they'll have to manage that too, and that will not
Mm-hmm.
help their efforts. But it's just I look at it from the point of view where I'm very publicly associated with CSIS, and I'm proud of the organization. I know they do important work, and um, and because I'm associated with it, whenever I read in the news that they're people that are unhappy and the organization is struggling, you know that makes me sad.
Well, and again, to point out, the book that you wrote, and if I may say, some of the work that I'm doing is really important because if all you hear is a negative, then of course it's going to have an impact. And as well, since the organization historically has been rather bad at telling its own story, if it doesn't tell its own story, someone will tell it on its behalf.
Well,
And if it bleeds, it leads, right? And maybe not literally in this case, but it's the bad news that dominates when it comes to CSIS and CSE. I
Well,
want to
can I,
finish.
can I say on that note? Sorry,
Sure.
before a very quick story on that note, and I mentioned the book, but I was home. I was sitting at home one night, and I got a call from my brother, and he says, Andrew, I'm watching the CBC, and there's a guy on here being interviewed, and he's about to be deported on a security certificate. Okay, and he's crying. His wife is crying. The interviewer is incredibly sympathetic, and I feel terrible. He's like, should I? He says, should I feel bad? Like, should I feel terrible? And I said, well, I can't get into the nuts and bolts of the case, but if the Supreme Court, I said, look, man, if the Supreme Court upheld it and it's gone through all the judicial oversight, then maybe you feel a little more comfortable knowing that this was upheld at the highest levels. And I hung up the phone. And I thought, this is my brother who I love, who loves me. I was his best man. He was my best man. He knows that I didn't join CSIS to pick on people or to cause problems. I thought, if he feels so bad, he's got to pick up the phone and call me. Think about all the people out there who don't have a brother at CSIS
Yes,
that are
yes,
watching the show and what they're thinking,
yeah.
and what that can't pick up the phone and feel a little bit better about watching the show. So that's what we're up against sometimes, right? That's a big challenge too.
That's a great story. I'm glad you told that. And just for my listeners who aren't as familiar, so what we call national security certificates was a tool the government brought in quite some time ago for individuals who were not Canadian citizens who arrived here and whom we later found out posed a threat to national security either because they were linked to terrorism or whatever. And the government agreed that because they weren't citizens, they had obtained their status as a landed immigrant or whatever in Canada under false pretenses by not admitting they were terrorists. Surprise, surprise! They didn't put terrorists on their application form. That in fact we had the right to remove them. And I actually testified in 4 of the 5 Islamist cases in the 2000s, and it was, I'll tell you, that was an experience in and of itself. But I
Sure.
think you're right. I think that the average Canadian who couldn't spell CSIS if you gave him the first 4 letters would look upon like, oh, these terrible people, these poor immigrants have been
Yeah.
misjudged and misinterpreted, and they're going to get tortured in their homeland and blah 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 blah. But no, it's a great story. So to wrap this up, Andrew, what can be done about it? Now, I do want to point out one more thing that I've heard from a number of people. I had coffee with an old friend the other day. I've known since I started the CSIS in 2001. His career dated around this. He started around the same time. He was an IO, and he said the one thing that's making the rounds an awful lot on the inside is that people are sick and tired of hearing their management, and this goes right up to the director, proclaiming publicly ad nauseum that the organization is systemically racist and is inherently evil. We've got these terrible people working here. They're misogynist, they're racist, they're sexist, they're this, they're that. And he says people, the employees are just, they're saying, why in heaven's name would I work for an organization that tells, the only thing it tells Canadians on a regular basis is that we're awful. We're a systemically racist organization. I mean, what kind of selling feature is that? I mean, unless you're a neo-Nazi fascist, I'm pretty sure you're not going to want to sign up for an organization that looks like that. What do you think can be done to maybe now? Again, in fairness, you're no longer there. I'm no longer there. What you and I are say that in a $1.50 get you a small coffee at Tim's.
That's right. That's right.
What do you think could actually make a difference in terms of the morale issue? It's a big question, and I apologize for that, but just maybe a few thoughts from your end.
For sure. Look, forget about the people who want to work there. Think about what that does to the people who you're knocking on doors and asking for help.
Yeah.
I need you to help me. And then that person goes online, looks up, but you guys are racist. you said it yourself that you're all racist. Why would I help you?
Why did you really knock on my door today? Is it because I happen to be a certain ethnicity or religion, or is it because you want my help?
So I think that's a challenge. And not that, but I have to be true. Like I had my experience at CSIS. I'm a white male. My experience is my experience. I don't get into that in the book for the very reason that other people have different experiences than me, 100%. Right. And I don't, and that they will tell their stories and there's basically an organization made up of people and their stories. But I was not like my experience. It was a systematically racist organization. And I felt comfortable knocking on doors, asking for help because I believed in the mission of the organization and the important work it was doing. I think the challenge that they have is because, as I said, CSIS does not have much of a public face and they're not out there, then it's on the leadership to really acknowledge the sacrifice and the challenges that people have working there for the
great point.
What they ask their people to do and how that impacts their lives and the stresses that people have and the mobility and the being discreet about where you work. If the only kind of acknowledgement you get, because you don't get thanks, right? You're not telling anybody where you work. So no one walks up to you on the street and says, thank you for your service. Like one of the weirdest things that's happened since I've written my book is I'll get messages from friends saying, thank you for your service, which I've not received in 10 years that I worked there.
Yeah. And I get that a lot too, actually. Yeah. Same thing.
And I feel embarrassed receiving it now. And but that you do not receive that when you work there. No one says thank you because no one knows where you work, and that's fine. That's what you sign up for. So the leadership there, I think it's very important that they are thanking their people for their service, that they are acknowledging the challenge and the sacrifices of the role because they have a kind of a larger, unfortunately, they have to do that. They have to play that role. And so when your leadership is not thanking you for your service, but instead saying, we're not, we have challenges repeatedly. And I think that can be demoralizing. So now that's not to say that CSIS doesn't have challenges. Absolutely. Are there bad apples that work there? Absolutely.
You saw it and I saw it. I mean, like you said, an organization is perfect.
100%. 100%. And you have to deal with that for sure. And every organization, needs to be better and can be better. The challenge that they have there is that, as I said, they are the only ones you're going to get feedback from is your coworkers and your supervisors about a job well done, right? And if you're not getting that from them, you're not getting that from anywhere. That's tough. That makes it a less rewarding job. And then you're really just relying on your own feeling of self-satisfaction that I did my work and did a good job, and not hearing that from anybody is tough. So as I said, I understand that the leadership there wants to be in the public and acknowledge there are challenges, and there are, but they have to balance that because when their people hear that, and then they go out and say they work for CSIS, they go and knock on door, or they tell their wife or their partner, and it is, I don't know, it doesn't feel great. And as I said, when I do talks now, I get that question, right? Hey,
Mm-hmm.
we saw the lawsuit. You were in Toronto during that lawsuit. Oh, we
Yeah.
saw that the
Yeah.
director came out and said that the director came out and said that it's a systematically racist organization. Should I apply to CSIS?
Yeah.
Right. I am a whatever my background is. Should I
Right.
apply? Right. I go on my way to say yes. I go on my way to say I think everyone should because I believe in it. But they're asking that question. People are asking that question.
You raise a really good point, and as you said, it's not that you have to ignore the bad, but you certainly have to balance it with talking about the good. And yes, security intelligence organizations are very challenged in terms of what they can and cannot say for reasons you and I think many understand. You can't talk about certain things, but if the only message coming out from within the very leadership of the organization itself is that this place is a shithole full of very bad people, it's definitely going to have an impact on hiring. So I think, Andrew, that you and I should be brought back and we'll solve all the problems. What do you think? What's your September look like?
That we should go back. Sorry, go back and what's that? What are we?
Resolve all the issues.
Oh my! Well, look, it's a challenge. If they had their easy answers, they would have. Well, they're smart, accomplished people. I was a low level foot soldier there. I did not. So the folks above are definitely grappling with these challenges, and that's what they are. As I said, I don't think there's any easy answers, but yeah, I get the same feedback that you do that it's been tough sledding. The COVID's made it harder. And considering the important work they do, they gotta get it right. And
Exactly.
it's important they get it right.
Well, I think we have all the answers in this podcast. I hope someone's listening. But
Well, I wasn't going to jail before the book, but maybe this podcast will come out.
well, we'll have adjoining cells, Andrew. We can keep each other company. Listen, I want to thank you once again for joining me. It was a great conversation, and I said, I hesitated to talk about this, but it just has become so obvious to me now in every conversation. And I do have coffee with a lot of my former colleagues, as well as people who are on the fence whether they should leave or not. And I'm getting this constantly being raised that it became the elephant in the room as far as I was concerned. So thanks for shedding some light on your own experiences and just having an honest heart to heart conversation on maybe what the problem is and what we should do about it.
Well, thank you for having me. And I said, for, this podcast has been great, and all the work you do to the word celebrate or raise awareness about the important work CSIS does. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book. It's to raise awareness. And this is a challenge that when people read in a report that says the morale at CSIS is low, I think it's important that they understand why. It's not that they're doing all sorts of terrible things over there and people aren't comfortable with it. No, it's that career, all the things that people struggle with in their jobs, that every job has, your career path and pay and not being promoted and asked to move. They're real people. So I felt that was one of my reasons to write the book. And one of the things that I feel an obligation to do now is to keep talking about it. And you've been doing that for a long time, and I appreciate it. And hopefully we've captured it in a way that accurately captures the mood there. That's my hope.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the feedback. And here's hoping that someone's listening. So that was my conversation with Andrew Kirsch. He, of course, was an intelligence officer with CSIS for a 10-year period. And more importantly, the author of I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Code Names, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. It's available on Amazon as well as Indigo, Chapters Indigo. What do you think of our conversation? I mean, I'm sure you've heard the same news. Are you interested in working for a security intelligence organization that's being labeled as systemically racist? Does it affect your decision? Love to hear your feedback. You can reach me on email, borealisrisker@gmail.com, or on Twitter @BorealisSaves. You'd also find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. If you like the content, want to get more of it, go to the website, borealisthreatnumbers.com. Hit the subscribe button. You get a free daily digest of all the podcasts and blogs. There's also a link there to my latest book, The Peaceable Kingdom, A History of Terrorism in Canada, from Confederation to the Present. It's self-published, and it's basically the inside story of what counterterrorism was like from 1868 on to the present day, so it covers a long period. Love to hear your feedback as well as ideas for other podcasts. We'll talk again very soon. Until then, take care.